As of this week, the defending champion New York Knicks are heading into training camp with exactly 2 centers on the entire roster. And insiders are genuinely split on whether that's a deliberate strategy or a genuine unforced mistake. I've gone through every angle of this ongoing center situation, all the failed pursuits, and the real argument on both sides. Every quote, every name, every angle. Let's break it all down right now. So before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because this is genuinely one of the most important storylines hanging over this entire title defense. Let's start with exactly where things stand right now, because the numbers themselves tell a genuinely stark story. As of August 4th, the Knicks have 13 players under contract, 1 open roster spot remaining, 0 two-way contracts actually used, and exactly 2 centers on the entire roster in Karl Anthony Towns and Andre Drummond. That's it! A team defending its first championship in 53 years is currently one single injury away from having no genuine depth at the center position whatsoever, relying entirely on a 30-year-old star and a 33-year-old veteran to cover every single minute at that spot for an entire season. Leaving a roster spot completely unused and 0 two-way slots filled this deep into the offseason is genuinely unusual for a championship-caliber franchise heading into training camp, since most contenders have their full complement of depth pieces locked in well before this point in the calendar. There are genuinely 2 competing explanations for how New York ended up in this exact position, and each one paints a very different picture of this front office's decision-making. The first argument suggests Leon Rose is deliberately holding on to that final roster spot and the money attached to it, waiting specifically until training camp cuts around the league free up a genuinely better young center than anything that was actually available back in July. Under this theory, players like Yves Missi and Moussa Diabate represent the real trade targets Rose actually wants, and he's simply being patient enough to wait for circumstances around the league to shift in his favor before pulling the trigger on anything. It's the kind of disciplined, value-first approach that's actually defined plenty of this front office's other roster decisions throughout the entire offseason, prioritizing genuine fit and financial flexibility over simply filling a roster spot for the sake of appearances. The second, considerably less flattering argument suggests Rose has simply already failed at this specific task. Going into training camp with nobody behind a 30-year-old Towns and a 33-year-old Drummond represents a genuine, unforced risk, and a growing pile of rejected offers starts to look less like a coherent strategy and more like a front office that's repeatedly struck out at the exact same position all summer long. Both readings will likely get fully settled one way or another by late September, once training camp actually opens and the front office either finally lands a real answer at the position or simply runs out of time entirely. Fans and analysts alike are essentially left waiting on the same real-time verdict, since there's genuinely no way to distinguish deliberate patience from an outright miss until the actual outcome finally reveals itself. It's worth laying out just how many separate pursuits have actually failed at this point, because the list is genuinely long. Leon Rose let both Ariel Hukporti and Trey Jemison leave without adding any direct replacement, and his known pursuits of Yves Missi, Moussa Diabate, and Moussa Cisse all fell apart. The last of those specifically when Dallas matched New York's own offer sheet within the required 48-hour window. Jeremy Sochan also departed without a direct replacement being brought in, That's 5 separate names New York either lost outright or actively pursued and failed to land, all at the exact same position over the course of a single off-season. It's genuinely difficult to overstate just how many different avenues this front office has already tried and come up empty on, ranging from restricted free agency offer sheets to straightforward trade calls to simply retaining its own internal depth pieces. The optimistic case holds that Rose is deliberately preserving flexibility beneath the second apron specifically so he can eventually sign a genuinely better center once training camp cuts around the league start happening, drawing a direct parallel to the exact same late timing strategy that eventually produced the Karl Anthony Towns trade itself. New York has already pursued Missy more than once, including a previous attempt to package him together with Jose Alvarado at the trade deadline, and the front office has also checked in on Diabate again more recently this summer. Names like Ryan Kalkbrenner in Charlotte and other available bigs around the league remain on New York's radar too, giving the front office at least a handful of realistic targets to circle back to once roster cuts around the league genuinely open things up. It's worth remembering the Towns trade itself only came together relatively late in the process too, meaning this front office genuinely has a real, recent precedent for landing exactly the kind of impactful, late developing move this current situation would require. There's also real context worth remembering about the guard depth New York did manage to successfully retain this offseason, since it shows the front office wasn't universally struggling everywhere. Jose Alvarado is set to return on a new 3-year deal worth roughly $14 million after declining his own player option, keeping a genuinely valuable guard in the rotation directly behind Jalen Brunson. That retention took a bit of drama to actually get done too, with Alvarado initially delaying his own player option decision while the Knicks reportedly explored trade talks involving him around the draft, before everything ultimately settled with him choosing to simply return to New York on this new multi-year contract instead. Alvarado's own popularity in the city runs deep as well, given his roots as a Brooklyn native who grew up idolizing this exact organization before eventually earning his way onto the roster as a genuine, trusted contributor during the actual championship run. Josh Hart, for his part, has kept his own sense of humor through this entire uncertain offseason. The 31-year-old posted about the wild free agency period earlier this summer and even joked about finding a country music-loving replacement for Mitchell Robinson, a lighthearted jab, referencing Robinson's own well-known personal interests now that he's off in Boston. Hart himself becomes eligible for his own 4-year extension on August 10th, with real speculation building that he could follow both Brunson and McCall Bridges in accepting a team-friendly number specifically to help keep this exact championship roster together for as long as possible. That kind of consistent, sacrifice-driven culture from the roster's core leaders is exactly the reason this front office has been able to retain as much of its championship group as it has, even while operating under such tight second apron restrictions. Step back and look at the complete picture here, and New York's center situation represents one of the more genuinely fascinating roster-building gambles happening across the entire league right now. This is a team that just won a championship, and it's entering training camp with a real, legitimate hole at one of the sport's most important positions, betting that patience and financial discipline eventually produce a better outcome than simply overpaying out of panic earlier in the summer. Whether that patience gets rewarded with a genuinely useful late addition, or whether this front office simply runs out the clock with nothing to show for it, remains one of the single biggest storylines hanging over this entire title defense. For a fan base that just celebrated its first title in over 5 decades, watching the exact position that could determine whether this team actually repeats, remain this genuinely unresolved, is a real source of anxiety heading into the new season. So here's where everything stands. The Knicks enter training camp with only Karl Anthony Towns and Andre Drummond as their sole centers, having watched 5 separate pursuits at the position fall apart across the entire offseason. Whether that reflects a deliberate, patient strategy waiting on training camp cuts around the league, or a genuine front office failure at the position that mattered most, remains a real open question that should get answered one way or another within the next several weeks. So tell me what you think. Do you believe Leon Rose's patience at center is a genuinely smart, deliberate strategy? Or do you think the Knicks have simply mismanaged this specific position all summer long? And which remaining target, whether it's Yves Missy, Moussa Diabate, or someone else entirely, would you most want to see New York actually land? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you catch every update as it happens. I'll be back soon with more Knicks news.